So in the last video, if you watched it through, you heard about how I started painting as a kid, and I was self-taught. And the reason for that is that we just didn't have any art teachers in the little country town I was in. And so when I showed this great passion for art, I didn't have anyone to teach me any different. And I just was doing it on myself. I don't think anyone in the town really knew I painted. None of the kids at school knew I painted. I was bullied a fair bit at school, and I certainly wasn't going to tell them I was painting. But I really got some value for myself and my creativity, and I discovered I could paint. And when you discover you can do something, you've got two choices, I get. Or there's three things can happen. You can nurture it and explore and do more and more and more. You can go, no, it's not for me, and give up. Or I think the third one, which I know I have friends like this whose parents just haven't been on board with them and squash their art and make it really hard for them to be an artist and to be expressive. Well, it wasn't the case with my parents, and they encouraged us kids to be creative. And my older sister was a ballet dancer. My younger brother was a pianist. My younger sister sang. So Mum and Dad used to encourage us to do things like that. And this is one way my parents encouraged me. They also encouraged me in drama, which is a totally different story, which I won't cover on this channel. But here I was as a kid. Like early teenage boy, being a teenage boy, and I was painting a lot and learning myself about how to paint, and no one to teach me. We moved to Sydney. My dad was had an itinerant job and moved around regularly, and so we moved to Sydney to Bankstown Boys High School, and was halfway through year 9. Now, in those days, you chose electives at year 8. So year 8, 9 and 10, you did these electives in your courses. Now, in the school I was at in Coolaman, in the country school, we didn't have any choices. You did woodwork and tech drawing. That was your choice. Nothing else. The boys couldn't do the cooking and the girls couldn't do the woodwork. That was the way it was in those days. And so there I am. Go to this big city high school, boys' school. Oh, that was terrible. A whole heap of stuff around that. Bankstown Boys High, 700 boys in secondary only. I'd come from a small school of about 160 secondary kids, and mixed male and female, and to this big jungle of concrete. And fortunately, Dad convinced the principal to allow me to go to the art class instead of the woodwork class, and to swap electives. So halfway through the course, and fortunately, Dad was pretty good at selling me, I think. I really miss Dad. He's passed away now, but he was one of my best promoters. And so he got me into the art class. And I think that was where, oh wow, it's just magnificent. I just got put with one of the best art teachers I've ever seen and been, including myself, better than me by a long shot. A fellow called Bruce Jarvis. He opened an exhibition for me just a few years back. Bruce was an amazing teacher. He just got on the money and just inspired us, and the art class was made up of mostly the rougher kids in the area, because they just loved it. They loved the freedom and what he taught and what we did, and it was a really good environment. So I went flat out on art, and so I ended up passing my year 10 exams with an A, top level mark, and went on to do year 11 and 12. I actually didn't do my major work in painting though. I had another incredible teacher who taught us photography, and we had at the end of the year, when school's nearly finished and the exams are finished and they're just doing reports and keeping us babysat, we used to have this afternoon of electives, and when I did photography, he taught me how to do black and white film photography. I think it must have been year 10, end of year 10, beginning of year 11, because we were staying on to year 11, the year 10s that were going left. And so I learned how to do photography, and I ended up with my my photography as my major for my class, and that was great. In fact, my work was chosen for state exhibition at the end of the year. So photography was as an art form was a very new form, and so to be chosen for state exhibition was pretty amazing. And so yeah, obviously I got a good art mark, and I went off to art college. So art college was a bit different. First of all, by this stage, I realised that I wanted to do painting and I wanted to do photography. And in those days, photography, you couldn't major, sub-major, because in the big art world, photography hadn't made it into the big A level yet. And so I had a choice, and I thought, oh, what do I do? I'll do photography and painting. Photography is a minor. But then as I got into the college, and I hadn't actually ever done painting at the thing, I didn't start doing it because I sort of knew how to paint a bit by this stage. And there we were. The art teacher, the painting teacher, was a colour field painter. Now, not want to decry colour field, it's got its own little magics about it, and I don't mind some of it in that way. But if you want to know what colour field is, look at a piece of carpet, put it on the canvas and say, well, colour field's like that. Like textured surface, no distinguishing features. A bit like Paul Seurat up close. And so, and I looked and I thought, oh, there's no way. These guys aren't going to cope with a landscape painter who paints in a palette knife and a kitchen knife. It was a palette knife. By now I'd transferred from the kitchen knife to a proper palette knife. But they're not going to cope with that, and I'm not going to get any good marks. And so it was a country high school back at Wagga. And art school, Charles Sturt University, which is in those days called Riverina College of Advanced Education. So I went to art college, and my first year we had those sort of 6 months of each subject, or subjects where you did 2 subjects in a subject and you experimented and tried different things. And I did silversmithing, and I fell in love with it. I love silver, so I became a silversmith. I majored in silversmithing, not painting, because I kept painting for myself. Now, I think one of the things that are there is that when you paint for yourself, there's possibly 2 ways to do it. You teach yourself. You can either learn from others or learn from yourself. And there's a limit to learning from yourself, and depending on who you're learning from, depending on what you're doing in your education. Was I a naive painter? No, and often naive painters are people who are self-trained, who haven't gone to art college and haven't done those things. And by this stage, I'd been to art college and done all the art things. I knew art and what it was and how you did it, and knew about composition and design and all those things, and colour theory and all that stuff I learned along the way, which I didn't know when I was 13-year-old, 14-year-old starting off. And that was just intuition and taking pictures from books and painting them for a number of years. And so that became a silversmith and a photographer as well. So you have a look at my channels, you'll see that there's a Russell McKane photography and Russell McKane silver. That's because I still do those 2 things. They don't get my major attention. My major attention is in my painting. So think about self-education and an artist. You don't have to go to art school to be a good painter. And a lot of good painters get through without going to art school because they haven't gone to art school. Art school can turn you into something that you don't necessarily want to be, because like all things, there's systems of learning. And I think that was one of the things that, I was in Europe recently. I'll talk to you about that another time. But I was having a look at Gustav Klimt. Now, Klimt is the painter of the Kiss. Amazing painting. Just really beautiful. And I got to see that while I was there in Vienna. And but in one of the galleries, and it may have been in Vienna, but it may have been in Barcelona, I came across a painting of a Klimt. And it was a painting of the old school. It was a salon painting. It was a formal portrait done with all the finesse and the skill of a really good painter, like Gainsborough sort of quality. It was a really good painting, and he certainly had the brush ability. You can tell a second-rate and a first-rate painter of portraits by how much freedom they have in paint. And yeah, he's a really good realistic painter, but he rejected all that and was part of the secessionist movement, which is the Central and Eastern European equivalent of the Impressionist movement, who rejected the salon and the teaching academies, because the teaching academies had a way to teach, and they taught you how to teach this way. And that is great, but it's not great, because you end up cookie cutting your artists out of that. So one of the advantages for me was because I didn't do my painting through a college, because if I'd have stayed at the art college and done painting there, I would have gone and become an abstract painter. But I really wasn't where my heart was. My heart was with the Australian landscape, and how do I paint this landscape so it doesn't look like Europe? See, the problem is that all landscape painting in Australia until the 50s was really painting in a European manner. That sounds really strange, because you look at my work here and hey, if there's anything Renaissance and techniques, I've got a very European techniques. But the way of seeing the landscape was different. And I come to understand that the rules that you had to paint by didn't apply in Australia so much. They applied really good when you've got country lanes and hedgerows and manufactured and European landscapes, but they didn't work in the Australian bush so much. Few abstract painters got that really right, and they rejected that. And people like, one of my absolute favourite Australian painters is Fred Williams, who's a landscape painter on the edge of abstractionism, and if you like, Australian abstract expressionist really, but a landscape painter. The landscape in Australia is incredibly powerful because our landscape is powerful. Our landscape is all pervasive. As long as you don't live on the coast in Sydney, where you've got that beautiful harbour bridge, etc., the rest of Australia is just dynamic. And so that's what I was responding to, because I was a desert kid. I was born in the desert. I was brought up on the edges and brought up in the country spaces. And you know, it's a bit like the landscape painting is like the country music painting scene, music scene in music. It's not downtown funk, or it's not hip hop. So as a person who's lived in landscape and understands landscape, because it's in my soul, to paint this landscape in the style of Europe just didn't make any sense to me as a young painter way back. And so I had this vision of painting the Australian landscape differently, not following the rules, not following the thirds, and not following the art society rules, because there were rules everywhere. And if you didn't do the right thing, you were in trouble. They literally, you almost got black banned sometimes in some of these art societies because you used black paint, or because you didn't put your paint out in the palette the right way. And I developed a palette method for myself that worked well, and I've used that for 50 years. And so I wasn't going to go put my paints in the order they thought I should put it in. That's how ridiculous rules in painting can be, but they are. They're all pervasive. And those things carry on to other things in art. And the art world is full of rules about what you say aesthetically, how you should be doing it, what you should be presenting yourself as. And there's just as much a salon now in the art scene, in the art galleries, as there was back then in the end of the French and English academies that said you had to paint this way. So being self-taught was a great thing, but it should never stop there. Because one thing I was doing was, I started when I had access to the galleries, because I didn't have any access to any art whatsoever when I was a kid. Now, you know, so you guys, you think, oh, yeah, here's the old man saying, oh yeah, but back in our days it was, because we didn't have we didn't have Instagram, we didn't have an internet. I couldn't go and have a look up Michelangelo look at Michelangelo, find out even if he existed, because I didn't know him. Turtles hadn't been invented then. I'd have to go to look him up in the encyclopedia, so I'd have to know what I was looking for. In fact, I don't think we did have a set of encyclopedias at home, and probably had a few articles of artists buried in there, but I didn't go looking for them because they were buried in this big book. And although I looked at most of the colour plates, most of the pictures weren't in colour. So we did have a few, Reader's Digest books, and I think Dad probably Mum bought one or two on artists that sort of had 20 great artists of the 20th century or something like that. So I did see a few, but there was no learning going on until I went to high school, and I had an art teacher who really educated us beautifully about art and all the movements in art. And I can just remember hearing for the first time about surrealism and seeing surrealism and Dadaism. Wow, that just blew my mind. It didn't matter that it was 70 years old. And in fact, the local art society, Maxton Art Society, I was a member of. It was a great place because you went down and did did artwork there. It was the place I did my first life drawing from. That's a big story. But in terms of there, we had someone do we had a big surrealist exhibition in Sydney, and someone did a bit of a session on surrealism. Well, this is 1970. Surrealism was 1920. And everybody, myself included, everybody was blown away that surrealism existed. It's no wonder Australian artists went to the continent to study, because we didn't have anything here. Well, we might have had a few works by a surrealist in the galleries, but we didn't have a clue what that meant. So, a learning experience. Where am I going with this? I guess what I'm saying is that what I did learn to do is that when an exhibition came to Australia, like the Surrealist exhibition I talked about in Dada, was that you learn. You just soak it in. So I'd start going to all the exhibitions I could get to as possibly I could. And I'd turn up and I'd be looking at paintings and learning from them. And I'd take my sketchbook and I'd draw in the exhibition gallery. There's another whole heap of stories about my fun with trying to draw in exhibitions and get kicked out because I was drawing from the artwork. Teaching yourself, don't learn from people who are hack painters. I think that's the first thing. If someone's got a method painting that they want everybody to paint that one method, probably the wrong person to be learning from. Learn from people who are prepared to push and see and understand. And you're sure you can come and look from me. You can look at my videos that show me painting and how I talk about how I paint and why I paint. I may well be the only person in the world painting this particular method and this particular style, plein air. Certainly the people who use this method aren't plein air in studio situations, just like the Renaissance painters did. But there's not many people using my method, plein air, but it may not be your method. And it's really important. Somewhere along the line, you've got to find yourself. You've got to find who you are, what makes you tick, what gets you excited, what gets the creative juices going, what gives you feedback to that, what works and what doesn't work. And yeah, sure, have lessons from people, but don't become mini people like the ones you just learnt from. Learn from them, move on. And I was sort of fortunate that I didn't have anyone to copy, anyone to teach me, anything like that initially. And by the time I'd got to art school, I'd had a few of that. And fortunately, the art department, well, I don't know, it was the 70s. The 70s didn't teach technique one little bit. Apart from silversmithing, you learnt techniques in the craft spaces of those. That was fantastic. But I'll tell you what, yeah, it was a much go and experiment and learn for yourself method of teaching in those days. And I think we missed something in that. There's some good places you could have actually got that from. East Sydney Tech was one of those. But yeah, that was the way it was in arts education. It was very much, there are no rules, there are no boundaries, and there's no teaching. You just went on and taught yourself. So one day I might tell you about my drawing lessons through my life. But hey, that's the way it was. So if you've been watching this, thank you for staying this long. If you actually heard me say these words, it means you've been here for 20 minutes or so. I don't know what the time is. I can't see a timer over there on this camera. But I know I've been chatting for a while, and I've been sort of circling around similar things as I got myself, to art college. And because I'm nice and set up, I might do another series, long video to follow this one up, and we'll see how we run.